Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The bell above the restaurant door chimed softly, and I glanced up from behind the counter. Another customer. It was mid-afternoon, and the lunch crowd had dwindled, leaving only a handful of tables occupied. I adjusted my apron, ready for another mundane interaction, when my eyes met his. He stood tall, with a relaxed confidence, dressed in a crisp shirt and dark jeans. Something about him made me pause. "Excuse me," his voice carried across the space as he approached the counter. I couldn't help but notice how cozy this place looks. "Do you own it?" I nodded, managing a smile. "Yes, I do. Nicola Whitmore, welcome to the Garden Plate. Can I get you a table or perhaps a recommendation?" His smile deepened, and for a moment, I felt a warmth spread through me, unexpected but pleasant. "Patrick Rhodes," he introduced himself, extending a hand. His grip was firm but gentle, sending a surprising jolt through me. "I'm in town for a few days, looking for good food and even better company. Seems I might have found both." I blushed slightly at his words, but years of managing a restaurant taught me how to keep my composure. I led him to a table near the window, the afternoon sun casting a golden glow across the room. "This table gives you a nice view," I said as I handed him the menu. "What brings you to our little town, Patrick?" He leaned back in his chair, surveying the restaurant. "Business," he replied casually, "but I like to mix business with a bit of pleasure. Exploring new places, meeting interesting people. Like you." I felt my heart skip, but I quickly masked my surprise with a light laugh. "Well, I hope we live up to your expectations." I walked away to give him time to peruse the menu, though his presence lingered in the back of my mind. Something about him was magnetic, drawing me in, but I reminded myself to stay professional. A few minutes later, I returned to take his order. He chose the chef's special, commenting on the fresh ingredients and how he enjoyed supporting small, local businesses. As the kitchen prepared his meal, Patrick continued to charm me with light conversation, asking about the history of the restaurant, my experience as a business owner, and sharing snippets of his travels. "I must say," he remarked as he finished his meal, "this has been the most enjoyable lunch I've had in a long time. I'd love to come back and try more of your recommendations." His eyes met mine again, and this time, the air between us felt charged with something unspoken. I smiled, but inwardly, I reminded myself not to read too much into it. After all, he was just passing through. Yet, as Patrick left that afternoon, promising to return the next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that this charming stranger had left more than just a fleeting impression. Something told me that my life, once steady and predictable, was about to change in ways I couldn't yet foresee. The next day, in the evening, Patrick came again. We sat at a table and talked casually about various topics. He came back the next day, and the day after that. I felt easy and good with him. We were attracted to each other. Patrick had a way of making every moment feel magical. It wasn't long after we started dating that he proposed, spontaneous, under the stars, just after closing the restaurant one night. I was exhausted, but the way he knelt in front of me, with a ring glittering in his hand, made the fatigue melt away. I said yes without hesitation, swept up in the whirlwind romance. Now, as we sat at the dining table surrounded by wedding brochures and fabric samples, it felt like the fairy tale was well underway. Patrick, ever the charmer, had taken the reins in planning. He insisted that our wedding be nothing short of perfect, lavish, grand, an event that would make everyone stop and stare. "I've already spoken to the best caterers in the city," Patrick said, flipping through a binder full of menus. "I want only the finest for us. And I was thinking, how about a string quartet for the ceremony?" I glanced at the pile of receipts stacking up, biting my lip. It was all so much, too much. Do we really need all of that? I mean, wouldn't something simpler be just as nice? Patrick paused, his charming smile flickering slightly. "Nicola, This is the most important day of our lives. Don't you want it to be unforgettable? I couldn't argue with that. Of course, I wanted it to be special, but something about how fast everything was moving made me uneasy. The grandiose plans didn't quite feel like me. They felt like him, his vision, his dream. Well, I suppose you're right, I murmured, leaning over to examine the invitation samples he had picked out. They were beautiful, gold-trimmed, embossed with elegant calligraphy. I just don't want to get carried away. Patrick smiled again, that dazzling smile that always seemed to melt my doubts. Trust me, Nicola. I've got everything under control. You don't have to worry about a thing. But I did worry. Late at night, when the world was quiet and Patrick was asleep beside me, I would stare at the ceiling, that nagging feeling of doubt creeping back in. There were so many decisions being made, and yet, it felt like I had no say in them. The wedding was beginning to feel more like a spectacle than a celebration of us. One afternoon, I confided in Aubrey, my sister, as we sat together over coffee. She had always been my sounding board, the one person I could trust with my fears. I don't know, Bree, I sighed, stirring my drink absent-mindedly. Patrick's doing everything, planning, organizing. It's like I'm just there for the ride. Aubrey raised an eyebrow. But isn't that what you wanted? Someone to take care of you, to handle the stress? Yes, but I hesitated. It feels off. Like I'm losing control. It's supposed to be our day, but it feels like his show. Aubrey leaned in, her voice soft but serious. Nick, if something doesn't feel right, you have to speak up. Don't just go along with everything because you think you have to. I nodded, though a knot tightened in my stomach. Aubrey was right. I needed to assert myself. But confronting Patrick wasn't easy. He was always so sure of everything, so confident. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being swept into something bigger than I had bargained for. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who snooped through someone's phone. But there I was, standing in the dim light of my bedroom, Patrick's phone glowing in my hand. He had gone out for a late-night meeting, leaving his phone behind, a first. Something in my gut told me to look. The messages were right there, under Aubrey's name. My heart raced as I opened the chat, scrolling past what seemed like harmless exchanges. But then, I saw it. A picture of Patrick, shirtless, sent to her with the caption, "Can't wait until she's out of the picture." My breath caught in my throat, and I kept reading. Aubrey had replied, "Soon enough. The wedding will be unforgettable, just like we planned." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like I'd been physically struck. The words on the screen blurred as tears welled up. This couldn't be real. My sister, my fiancé, planning to humiliate me. I scrolled further, my hands trembling, uncovering more of their plan. Aubrey was pregnant with his child, and they intended to reveal it at the wedding in front of everyone. I dropped the phone onto the bed, my mind spinning. How had I been so blind? Everything suddenly clicked. The over-the-top wedding plans, Aubrey's constant visits, Patrick's insistence on handling everything. They had been working together all along, plotting behind my back. Just then, I heard the front door creak open. Patrick was back. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let him know what I had discovered, not yet. "Nick." His voice echoed from the hallway. "You still awake?" I wiped my eyes quickly and slipped the phone back onto the nightstand before he entered the room. "Yeah, I'm here," I called out, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Patrick walked in, flashing that familiar smile. "Sorry I'm late. You should have gone to bed without me." I forced a smile, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me like an anchor. "It's fine," I replied, though nothing felt fine at all. As he leaned in to kiss me, I turned my face slightly, avoiding his lips. If he noticed, he didn't show it. He simply climbed into bed beside me, oblivious to the truth I now knew. Lying there next to him, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I needed a plan. I couldn't just confront him, not yet. If I was going to get through this, I had to be smart. They thought they could humiliate me at my own wedding, but I wasn't going to let them win. I would make them both pay. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in days. My mind was sharp, focused. Patrick kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, oblivious to the storm he had created. As soon as the door clicked shut, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number of a private investigator I had once hired to check on the restaurant's suppliers. I needed more than just texts. I needed proof. An hour later, I sat across from Detective Lyle Chambers in a quiet cafe. "So, you want me to look into your fiancé and your sister?" His eyes narrowed as he flipped open a small notebook. "Yes," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I want to know everything about them, especially Patrick. He's hiding something." He leaned back, considering my request. "These things can get ugly. You sure you want to dig?" I nodded without hesitation. "I already know they're planning something. I just need to know how deep it goes." Lyle took a sip of his coffee and slid a business card across the table. "All right, I'll get started. Give me a few days." As I walked back to my restaurant, a quiet determination settled over me. I had to continue pretending. Patrick and Aubrey couldn't know I was onto them. They were planning to humiliate me in front of everyone I loved, and I wouldn't let that happen. That evening, Patrick and I went over more wedding details. He was his usual charming self, excitedly talking about the flowers, the music, the guest list. But all I could think about was how it would feel to expose him for the fraud he was. His words floated past me as I nodded absent-mindedly. "You seem quiet tonight, Nick," he said, noticing my distraction. I forced a smile, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat every time I looked at him. "Just overwhelmed with all the planning," I lied smoothly. "But I trust you. You've got everything under control." His smile grew, pleased with himself. "I told you, babe. Just leave it to me." "Oh, I will," I thought. "And I'll leave you exactly where you belong, behind bars." The day had finally arrived, my wedding day. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the lace on my white dress, feeling the weight of the day sinking into my bones. But unlike every other bride, I wasn't nervous about the vows, the flowers, or the guests. I was waiting for the moment when everything would unravel. Patrick had insisted on a grand ceremony at the lakeside estate, complete with chandeliers, hundreds of guests, and an orchestra. I had pretended to gush over his extravagant plans, but now, standing in the bridal suite, I knew that soon enough, his perfect facade would crumble. A knock on the door. It was Aubrey, dressed in a pale blue gown, her face glowing with a sinister satisfaction. She looked every bit the perfect maid of honor, but I knew better. "Ready to be the most beautiful bride ever?" she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I turned to her slowly, forcing a smile. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be." She stepped closer, touching the hem of my veil. "You've got it all, Nicola. Patrick, the dream wedding. It's almost unfair." I felt my stomach turn at her words, but I didn't flinch. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? As she walked out, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to happen. Detective Lyle had called me that morning. The report he had compiled on Patrick was worse than I had imagined. Not only was Patrick cheating on me with my sister, but he was also a wanted man in 3 states: fraud, embezzlement, and even suspected identity theft. When I reached the altar, Patrick's grin was wide, as if he already thought he'd won. The guests were seated, the music played, and the ceremony began. But as the officiant started speaking, I noticed movement at the back of the crowd. It was subtle at first, but then 2 uniformed officers walked down the aisle, their eyes fixed on Patrick. "Stop this ceremony." A booming voice echoed through the room. It was Lyle, accompanied by the police. Patrick's face paled. "Nicola, what's going on?" I stepped forward, holding his gaze. You should have known better than to think you could fool me. They're here for you, Patrick." The room erupted in gasps. Just as the police moved in to arrest Patrick, Aubrey suddenly stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "I'm pregnant with his child," she screamed, desperation coating every word. The chaos was instant, guests whispering, cameras flashing, and my sister standing frozen in the middle of it all. But I was calm. My plan had worked. Patrick was led away in handcuffs, and Aubrey's world crumbled around her as she stood alone, realizing the depth of her betrayal. The disaster wasn't mine, it was theirs.